guys, I have finally finished this painting, Emerging. And I know it's taken quite a while to emerge from my studio. I think I started this last year sometime, and it's just been sitting there, and it's one of those paintings that needed a bit of this and a bit of that. So finally I get to share with you Emerging and tell you what it's about. Well, this is a swan that is beginning to emerge and realize who he is. And he could be a he or she. I'm going to call him a he for this story because I feel like he's a beautiful, handsome swan. And he's just coming into the realization of who he is. And when you see the whole painting, you'll see that his neck's about to come up and he's about to take his first flight. He's, stretching his wings. So you'll see that. I'll put some pictures up. But I just want to tell you what it's about. I want to encourage you with this. The story of the ugly duckling is about a swan who didn't recognize he was a swan, right? He thought he was an ugly duckling the whole story, and he looked like an ugly duckling. He looked like a little funny looking little duckling. No one could figure out who he was. He looked different from everyone else. And then finally one day he was all grown up and he caught sight of himself in the water and he saw, oh my goodness, I'm a beautiful swan. And at that moment of realization, he emerged into who he truly was. Although he always was a swan, it was at that moment that he lifted up his wings and he looked at himself and he realized, oh my goodness, I have a destiny and a calling on my life. I'm actually a beautiful swan. And so many times in life we don't see ourselves in the fullness of who we really are because we always come in seed form. How many of you know that everything in life begins in a seed? But in that seed is the fullness of what it will be. And so we are already that fulfilled being, although we haven't been fully fulfilled. If you know what I'm saying, we're kind of living in the tension of that. So if we are waiting to see who we will become before we are willing to become and step into that person, we may be waiting for a very long time. That swan had to see who he was, before he actually stepped into his swanness, okay? And many times we look at ourselves with our human eyes in the natural, just like that little swan. Little duckling looked at itself and saw, oh, I'm just this little ugly duckling. That's all I am. And he didn't have the ability to see with his heart. And I call this seeing with our hearts is my way of saying faith. Because really, all faith is, when we believe God, it's just being able to see with our heart eyes. It's being able to see something that's not visible to the natural eye, but it is visible to our heart eyes. And so we know that God has created us for incredible purpose. We know that we are filled with destiny. We know that we are his beautiful sons and daughters. So we know that in our hearts, but we may not see that in the natural. And because we don't see that, we shrink back, thinking that one day we'll see that and then we'll step into that. But the reality is, if we don't see it first with our hearts, we will never step into that. See, the swan happened to see himself for a moment in that reflection, and that changed who he was. But how many of you know that 5 minutes before he saw himself in that reflection, he was just as glorious as when he saw himself, right? But it took him seeing himself for him to step into the glorious being that he was. He already was that, but he had to see it first. And so I want to encourage you to see yourself as God sees you and as he created you to be a glorious being. You can read Psalm 139 and just let that soak in your spirit and just understand how amazingly glorious God has made you and has made me. And when we will see with our heart and our eyes and we will believe what he says about us, we'll actually step into who we truly are, and we'll actually fly. But we will not be able to do that if we're just waiting for it to suddenly happen without us stepping into it first. If you look at Hebrews 11, it's the chapter of faith. It's all these people that did incredible things with their lives. And none of those people could see in the natural what they were meant to be. They only saw with their heart eyes, and it became the faith and the substance for what their lives were going to become. And they had to step into things before they saw them. That's why they're called heroes of the faith, because they're really people who were able to see with their heart eyes what God was saying over them and what God was calling them to do. And so they were able to step into that before they could see it in the natural. And so what we need to do is we need to catch a glance of ourselves in the reflection of Jesus. You know that is the mirror. That is the mirror that we look into. We need to catch a reflection of ourselves, catch a reflection of Jesus, understand who He's recreated us to be, understand who He has created us to be, and then we'll be able to lift our wings up with this glory that we have already, but we will not be able to step into until we've caught a reflection of ourselves in Him and who He calls us to be. So I know that's really short, but take what you can from it and have an amazing day. Bye-bye.